excited. Dee Dee, I hope you're excited. Yay!
Dee Dee said, oh, that's...
I love it. Thank you. Oh, I think he's on. Okay.
Good luck. I love you.
Okay, guys, I'm so excited. Let's do this. Hi,
Nice
Dr.
to meet you.
Peaslee. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. You're Vian?
Vian, yes. Nice to meet
I
you.
pronounced it right. Good. Thank you. I'm good.
Good, good. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to
No
hop on
problem.
this meeting. I really do appreciate it.
I do several of these a week, and it's important to get the message out. So I think this is just one of the prices of doing these sort of studies. You want to get it interpreted correctly and out in the hands of people that can make a difference. So it's
Correct, yes. I just wanted to make sure that I had all of the information, and I'm actually really excited to let you know too that the video that I posted using your article, it's actually at over 1 million views. So
Oh wow!
yeah,
That's pretty good.
it is. It is.
Yeah, but in the grand scheme, the information gets out there. So
Of course, yes. Well, would you like to introduce yourself for starters and who you are and what it is that you do?
sure. My name is Graham Peaslee, and I'm a professor now emeritus from the University of Notre Dame. And my research was involved using analytical techniques to measure all sorts of chemicals of concern. But the most recent last 10, 12 years has been about PFAS. And those are the forever chemicals. So I measure them, and I have a technique of measuring them quickly. And then we try to make as many surveys as we can of where they're being used and why.
Okay, amazing. And then how did you get into that?
A long story, but I've always been interested in environmental issues, and so this was just one of them. And I had done a nice survey of brominated flame retardants, and somebody at the conference said, well, that's all nice, Peaslee, but why don't you try something real like PFAS? And I said, oh, what are those? And that was about 11 years ago.
11 years,
And
wow.
so the woman who told me about them is the world's expert in them. And she's right. They're very difficult, very complex subject. And I studied them, and I've studied them for 10 years, and we've come up with a technique that works to measure them, which is nice. And then I have tried getting the word out about where we're using them and where we shouldn't be using them. So this is one of the obvious places we shouldn't be using them.
Of course, of course. Well, thank you for everything that you're doing. I appreciate it. All of my followers appreciate it. So again, thank you. And then we can hop into the questions if you're ready.
Sure, I am.
Amazing.
So just a quick introduction on what PFAS are, the forever chemicals, right?
Yes.
So polyfluorinated alkyl substances, their proper name. But there are a whole class of chemicals, not just one, but over 15,000 that we know we have names for. And I don't know all 15,000 names. I'm good for the first 100 or so. And after that, then you have to look them up. And they're all the beautiful part of organic chemistry where you can make all these different combinations of molecules. But they're all characterized by one or a couple of important features. They have a lot of carbon-fluorine bonds. So they're organofluorine compounds. And the carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest single bond in chemistry. Nothing will attack it, or very little will attack it. Some of it will substitute, but very few things can destroy that bond. For example, there are no natural microbes that live on this. When you digest food or when you throw something in the landfill, all of it's digested by microbial action that eats the product and breaks them apart. Nothing will break carbon-fluorine bond and get energy from it. So nothing breaks these things down. Very few things in space, unless you burn them up completely in the sun or something. These things are indestructible. And that's their remarkable property that makes them excellent at soaps or surfactant materials that separate oil from water or stains from clothing or waterproofing an object. That's where they're used. But unfortunately, once we make them, that molecule persists forever. At least on geological timescales, whereas we usually think in terms of months and years. These things last decades, if not generations. And I think that's the issue with creating these things. I'm convinced that some 500 years from now, an archaeologist is going to dig up the 20th century, the 21st century, and say, oh, look, this is when humans used fluorine, and put it in everything.
Oh, wow.
Because it's going to be there long after long after we're not here. And I think that's an issue with this type of chemical. Not all of them are perfectly toxic, but all the ones we've met are toxic so far. I can't guarantee all 15,000 are, but certainly enough of them are toxic, and they are everywhere. Once you make them, they never go away. So they cycle through the ecosystem, and we'll all be eating them at some point, and thus, or our children will. And that's the real issue. These things persist in the environment. They're called forever chemicals by the media, which is a great name. People begin to recognize, maybe I shouldn't put this in something that's temporary.
Yes, I do agree. I do think in maybe a decade or so, some of our children will be eating it, unfortunately. Because I also heard that it gets cycled back into our drinking water as well, for instance, when we wash our clothes. So,
absolutely.
And that's very scary.
Clothes will wash it off. One of the best ones is the food wrapper story from 7 or 8 years ago now. We looked at fast food wrappers, and they had PFAS, just being introduced to them. And in my household, I had teenagers at the time, and the fast food didn't stay in the wrapper very long. It was eaten within milliseconds. But the wrapper in this country, they all go into the waste. And so anything that ends up in the waste in the United States ends up in a landfill. And in 60 days, a paper wrapper will disappear in a landfill. It's aerobically digested, and all the bugs eat it. And that means the PFAS will all be released. Not just some of them, but 100% of the PFAS will be released, and they'll trickle through the landfill leachate. That gets into the drinking water, into groundwater, and also into our irrigation water. So if there are any PFAS on any product, and feminine hygiene products are another example, there's an exposure risk to the wearer, but there's also a risk that all of us, even those of us with Y chromosomes, would be exposed because it gets into the water that we use in our food that we eat, or gets into our drinking water that we drink. And that means, or our children will. And that means that these things are harmful wherever they're used. But I think particularly worrisome at this point, the reason this article is so interesting is that people are worried about now and what I'm exposed to. So there'll be a risk to the wearer, but there's also a risk to all of us. So it's an environmental problem besides a personal risk problem.
Now leading into our second question. So with your study that recently, or with the article that recently came out on the 22nd, the menstrual products that you test, how do you pick and choose which products to test? Is it based on accessibility, their popularity, their price?
Yeah, nobody paid us to test things, I'll tell you that. Nobody really wanted us to test these things, but my students drive the testing. We had been sent a sample by a woman who used these products and sent us some new samples that she was worried that they have remarkable properties. Could they be using PFAS? And of the 5 she sent us, 2 of them were, and 3 of them weren't. And so we told that to her. We measured it and sent it back. And she's a colleague that I knew and said, I'd never heard of them before, but these ones were using PFAS. That's kind of unusual. And she said, can you publish that? And I said, well, unfortunately, I didn't purchase them, so I can't guarantee that you didn't, artificially add PFAS to them or something. But so it's not and it's also, you need dozens and dozens. You don't just, and these things are expensive. So I didn't have access to all that. But she said, well, can I write a blog about it? And I said, sure, I'll defend my analysis of them. And yeah, it's easy to do. So she posted on the Sierra Club that these 2 were containing PFAS. And she described what they were and why she was worried about it. And the next day I got a call from the company who asked, we don't use PFAS. And I said, well, that's funny. On your website, you have this list of ingredients that includes PFAS. Oh, we do? Oh. What's PFAS? So when I went through this whole story about what PFAS was, it was just ignorance. They had no idea what they were using. And the idea that anybody regulates textiles, or in fact most consumer products in this country, is silly. Nobody does. We litigate in the U.S. If something poisons somebody, then people can get sued, and that tends to drive companies away from selling that again. Yeah. But it's not effective. The hair coloring product was using 6% lead nitrate lead acetate, until just 2019. And that's such high lead concentrations that if you put it on your hands and you eat off them, you'd get sick. But it was available on the shelves in 2019, and I'm just stunned that we didn't catch that one 100 years earlier. But it is an example where we're putting these chemicals, until 10 years ago, nobody had ever heard of them. Yeah. And now we're putting them everywhere. And I think it's important that we realize that they don't need to be there in most cases.
Yeah.
So the products that we selected, I'm getting back to your question slowly, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
The products we selected were more or less random at first, until we got a large subset. We didn't get funded for them, so we couldn't purchase them easily. We purchased a few when one of my students went to Europe. She went and purchased some. We had friends in different countries that sent us some. We had friends in the US that sent us some. And at one point, the New York Times got interested in writing an article, so they went and purchased 45 of them, which was half the products we used to test it, and that was very nice of them. They wanted the exclusive story, of course, which we gave them in a newspaper story a couple of years ago about how it does be there, but not in all of them. And that's how we got enough to study, and it was all self-funded. And then we present these results. It takes a while to get peer-reviewed and do it right. So we had to refine the study a couple of times and then select the data that was publishable. And when we did that, we end up with a news story that I think is quite worthy. It's anybody can follow our procedure. We published that anybody can make these measurements, and we found about a third of the products were having PFAS in them, and almost all of them had PFAS, but very few of them had intentional levels of PFAS, over a third of them or so.
Okay, and so then that will actually segue me into our next question, because similar to what you had just said in regards to your colleague, how she had purchased the products and asked you to look at them, and then you couldn't publish because she bought it and you didn't buy the products. So how easy is it for somebody to put PFAS into these products? Because if it's in our products that we're using, in regards to the menstrual products, are these companies deliberately putting it in there? Are they is it going in there through the manufacturing process?
Well, we see PFAS everywhere, and that's probably unintentional because the two companies that make it in this country and the 6 worldwide have put PFAS into everything, drinking water, materials we buy and purchase. But most of it's not at very high concentrations. It doesn't serve a purpose. Okay. But when we see it at high concentrations in a product we're using that has a remarkable property, like it's waterproof, or it's stain resistant, or in the lipstick case, it was lasts forever. Well, it really is a forever chemical, and that's what we do with the lip paint. And so those sorts of characteristics allow us to interpret it as being intentional. So in the menstrual products, we did exactly the same thing. We look and we see trace levels in all of them. Almost all of them had some trace levels, but they were pretty low, way down below what you'd be concerned with being absorbed or into such a low concentration that if only a fraction of them came off, you wouldn't be able to measure it. But if we see levels that are on percent level or a 1/10% level, then it has a surfactant effect. It's actually being used for stain resistance or water resistance or some other property that they think they like. And in one case, I heard somebody describe if it was a 2-layer thing, maybe the first layer is permeable, the second layer is waterproof, and that would it would wick it away from the skin, make it feel drier. There's some sort of property that they think this chemical is giving to the garment, which may or may not be true. And as far as I can tell, it was pretty random, because sometimes it was on the inside layer, sometimes it's on the outside layer, if it was a textile. And that suggests that they don't know exactly what they're doing. Sometimes it was in the middle layer. And so it was pretty random compared. And so the manufacturers don't necessarily know what they're doing with it. They just want a competitive advantage over another one. And so, and a lot of these are small companies that have a few people. So, here's a better product, let's try this. But they don't understand what PFAS are or why people might be concerned about wearing them. So the job of this is to sort of get it out there and communicate to people. These are supposed to be ecologically friendly products, yet they have a forever chemical in them that lasts forever and is toxic and as well as persistent. So that's why I think it's important to distinguish between intentional PFAS and the ones that just happen to be there because there's some recycled content in there, or it was made in a mill in Brazil that had PFAS in the water. But that's very low concentrations compared to what you'd see when they're trying to make it waterproof. So if we get rid of 99% of the intentional use, then the remaining 1% that trickles around is going to go away on its own over a generation. That won't be the problem. And so the important part is to identify which of these things are intentional. And we try to make that. And there's good news in that. We're getting to a later question later on, but the fact that only some of them had intentional and 2/3 didn't, is great news, because that means it isn't everywhere. You can avoid it, and by happenstance, most of us do. But by calling attention to it, we can drive the manufacturers away from the intentional use of it. And after a while, the non-intentional use will go to zero too, because we'll get rid of it in all products.
And then when you were testing, did you notice a difference in the PFAS levels between the organic, non-toxic, and natural brands?
When we're talking reusable menstrual products, almost all of them are branded as eco-friendly. We didn't see one that wasn't branded as eco-friendly. I don't think I ever saw an organic one, but it was all eco-friendly. It's all good for the environment, fewer paper products. So absolutely everything was branded as being eco-friendly. And there were definitely a third of them that were not, in terms of strict eco-friendliness. I'm more also worried about human health, and then the human health risks, as well as the long-term environmental health risks. And so, but it comes both ways. So if there were, in the cosmetics world, eco-friendly versus organic, there were such labels like that, and we found PFAS. Often people didn't know quite what organic was, and so they could label it any way they wanted, and it wasn't necessarily a good tip-off. One thing that a consumer can use to differentiate is price. If you use PFAS in the manufacturer, you often add a cost to doing that. So it's an expensive chemical, but it also has good performance. So they often try to increase that price, which is an interesting observation. It's not true for all products, but it's true on some of these consumer products, where if it seems twice the price and it has remarkable attributes in the label, like, works better, works waterproof, or better, more water resistant than others, then that's a tip-off that they might be adding some forever chemicals to it. If they work just as well, according to some people, but they're half the price, often that could be a tip-off. Now, these are expensive products in general, so that doesn't mean anything. It's just, it's a suggestion, and it's a hope that you can try to differentiate until people start putting labels on it that tells you.
So sometimes more might not be better in this case.
That's, with respect to spending money, that's always true, but yeah, especially in this case.
Okay. Are there any certifications or labels that consumers could look for? Because I know you said with the more expensive ones, they try to label as much as possible, but are there any that would potentially draw an individual to buy it if they wanted to avoid these chemicals?
Yep, you want to find a label that says PFAS free, and that's the class of chemicals, PFAS, and people put that PFAS free in a label. That means they've tested it, and they've tested their supply chain, and they've made sure that the materials they use are PFAS free and there's no intentional PFAS added. Unfortunately, there isn't a menstrual product out there right now that says that. But with the advent of your blog and a couple of the dozen news stories, we're hoping that somebody in the industry gets the idea pretty quick to A, check that they're not using it, and B, start adding a 15-cent label. Because that would go a world towards helping the consumer use market forces to drive in the direction. You may have the toxic one at this price, or you may have at the same price a toxic-free one, and we're pretty sure that we know what the consumers will choose. And that's worked in other industries, like the food packaging I talked about, and also the firefighter textiles. Firefighters have this on their outer textile. And the firefighters were very upset to learn that they had a toxic chemical on the gear that was designed to keep them safe. So they fought very hard to get PFAS free, and there's now a labeling requirement that's supposed to write PFAS free. Unfortunately, the manufacturers have neglected to abide by it yet, but they're being encouraged to by lawsuits and various other things. But it's risky, because as soon as they label it PFAS free, if they get caught without it being PFAS free, then they can be sued. They don't want that. And they also want to get rid of their supply rather than have to throw it away and start afresh. So they're trying to put the label on as late as possible. But I believe within 6 months, some company will get the idea to put PFAS free on their materials, and they probably are, or else lawyers will sue them. And if they are, that means they've done a test, or they've asked their supply chain to confirm that these are PFAS free materials, and that they can state that. Somebody will test it for them, and if that's true, then for a very small fee, they've got themselves a market edge. And I think that's the way the free market works. I am hoping that this will work again in this case. This is a very specific set of products. and it should be pretty straightforward to do. And a bunch of companies already have products that are PFAS free. 2/3 of them do. So one of those will get ahead of it pretty quickly and start using the label. And then the consumer will have a way to tell. There's no way to tell from the labeling right now. You can take suggestive words on the advertising that this works better than others because it's more stain resistant or more waterproof. Those are great examples, but it doesn't prove it's PFAS. It just suggests.
Okay. And then with regards to the brands that you were testing, would you be able to give us some insight on what the brands were potentially?
Yep, I've sent that to you in the email. I didn't realize you didn't have the supplemental information. There's a table in there of the 73 brands we tested. What we don't do is we don't look individual results to the brands.
Okay.
So we can't tell you that all these ones were high or that half of these ones were high, for the obvious reason that we don't know if we got this brand. They have 16 different products and 3 different colors and all the different sizes. I mean, there's literally thousands of products out there, and we couldn't test them all. So what if we tested one from this brand and one from that brand, which often we only had one sample from, and it was or it wasn't? Does that mean all the rest were the same? No. And so we can't say brand X is always fluorinated and even on the 5 that we did get from that one woman, there were 3 from one company, and 2 of the 3 were fluorinated and one wasn't. And one was for very young women. It was called tweens. And so it was for tweens, early onset menstruation or early menstruation, when light flow, it might work better. And so that struck me as being particularly the one you don't want to put PFAS on because it's a growing body. You don't want to put indica disruptors near a growing body. So the idea of doing, it just was appalling. Yet another one that they made didn't have it, not because they intended not to, they weren't sure. Maybe in different countries perhaps with different chemicals, but they weren't keeping track of it because nobody had brought this to their attention. So now they're making it PFAS free, I suspect, well, only because they got sued over it. And I think this is the idea. We want to avoid lawsuits. We want the companies that are trying to do eco-friendly things to make their products eco-friendly and be transparent. And that should be the end of it. It shouldn't cost any company anything. No company's gone out of business. It's just going to cause them to be a little more transparent.
Are there any formulas or materials that you could potentially recommend them using in order to be PFAS free?
Yeah, it turns out that for the textiles, where we found most of the PFAS were intentional use of PFAS were in the textiles, it turns out that there were 2/3 that don't use them and 1/3 that did, which means there must be perfectly good products out there that are just layered differently or have enough layers to make them absorb or don't leak or whatever happens to be the product they're trying to achieve. And somebody's put a waterproofing agent in the middle of some of them. Does that help? Does that hinder? Presumably it helps, but not enough people are doing it, so they obviously doesn't help that much. And so the waterproofing treatments that are silicone are presumably safer than PFAS, and so there can be a silicone waterproofing done. And but I don't want to espouse any particular type of chemical. I don't know. I know it's not as bad as PFAS in terms of chemical safety, but I don't know if it works as well, and it's hard to put on a textile, perhaps. I don't know. Okay. But I think the different types of polymer and the synthetic materials used in textiles, in terms of the reusable pads and the reusable incontinence underwear and things like that, again, it's a combination of paper and plastic and various types of textiles that use these weaves. And so the macrostructure and the microstructure of how the weave is done does a lot about wicking the moisture away or keeping it contained. And I think that's probably all well known by people that do textiles for a living. And so there are plenty of options out there. It'll be hard for a consumer to tell the difference between the materials. I mean, I can't tell the difference between nylon and polyester unless you feel it really heavily and you've done a lot of this stuff. But there'll be some different properties people are looking for, and I don't know the best ones for this material. Okay. But they exist, and that's the important thing to know, that there are presumably chemicals that are green that could be used that are more efficient if they want something that does these types of properties. There's a whole opportunity for green chemists to come up with new products that are there. And so I think it's not a threat to everybody. It's just a an opportunity for those that know how to make it differently. And I'd encourage anybody in the textile industry to think about clever ways to make these materials the same way that you want.
Of course, thank you. And then for the viewers that are listening, would you be able to tell us a couple of the health conditions that have been associated with PFAS?
Yeah, you'll find out very quickly why I'm not invited to parties anymore. The health conditions with PFAS are staggering. There's a whole class of chemicals, as I said, 15,000 of them. We've only studied the health implications of a dozen or two. And those couple dozen all have health implications, human health implications. There's a bunch of environmental health as well. But they run the range from different types of cancer, both prostate cancer, but also other ones which are not male, kidney cancer, liver disorder, thyroid disorder. Thyroid is the gland that regulates the whole body metabolism. So having a thyroid disease, a precursor, is awful. You have different types of hypertension and preeclampsia. That's pregnancy-induced hypertension. Those show it's like a cholesterol mimic. Some of the heavy ones are like cholesterol mimics. And then there's a killer one of all of them, which is it's an immunotoxin, suppresses the immune system. And what would we want a good immune system for? Well, any sort of opportunistic disease or cancer can grow in a reduced immune system. And there was a wonderful study a terrible study a few years ago that showed that children that received a vaccine in third grade for measles, mumps, and rubella were tested the following year to see how good the vaccine was. And they found that it was just not an exposed population, just an average population that had a range of exposures. Some people used more PFAS, some people used less. And for every doubling in concentration of PFAS in the children's blood, there was a halving of the immune response to that one vaccine. So we know that it's a complex set of interactions in the body. The body's complex. Each of these chemicals goes to a different organ and stores up into it. So we know in mice it doubles the size of the liver, but that's only one of them, PFOA. Whereas in other C6, the PFHXAs and PFHXSs, doesn't appear to go to the liver, but it might go to the brain. Is that better? We don't know, because except for some rare forms of brain cancer, we don't know what this thing does. We just know that it goes to different organs, and anything that sticks in the body for a long time, and PFAS are very characteristically stick in the body for a very long time. For example, the red blood cells live in our body for about 2 months before they're recycled and grow more red blood cells. But the half-life of PFAS in blood is over 5 years of certain types. PFOA and PFAS live in the blood for 5.5 years or 3.5 years, respectively. And that's pretty scary. Something that it means it transports around on your blood. It's a bound of fatty acid binding proteins, and it goes organ to organ, and it stops off for a while and piles up in an organ somewhere. And then if you stop eating it, it'll come back out and still be in the blood coming in or going out. And those types of chemicals are persistent in the body. So they're not rapidly turned over. Some of them last for years. The shorter chain ones last less. And so the companies trumpet those as being safer. But you have to have 10 times as much to make it work. So it's having something 10 times as much, which is half as risky. That's not necessarily a good trade-off. And we've discovered these sort of regrettable substitutions time and time again in past chemicals. So switching away to another PFAS is probably not what we want to do.
Right.
And we want to try to find chemicals that are not carbon-fluorine bond in the middle. And that's what we're aiming for in terms of publishing all these data and say, look, this is a silly place to put it. Let's work on places where, if it's essential, maybe in a certain pacemaker and things like that, there isn't a substitute at the moment. They could keep it there. But for most of us, we don't need the exposure from any of these products. And the fact that the products exist that don't have them, bingo. I mean, it means they're not necessary. These are not essential.
Well, do you have any advice that you would like to leave for our viewers on how to reduce PFAS exposure in their everyday life?
Sure. I mean, this is where you have a very gloomy topic, and you have to tell people not to eat microwave popcorn or wear menstrual underwear that contain PFAS. Well, how do I tell? Well, there's no way for you to tell today, hopefully tomorrow. And that's not a great message. But remember that the power is with the consumer, and especially with educated consumers. If you can educate yourself, if you can read labels, there's a wonderful story, and it's on the line, you'll have to look it up. But there was a 16-year-old or 15-year-old at the time vegan in Mississippi, which was already a bit unusual. And she was looking around to understand what foods didn't have meats in them. And she found that there was a thing called brominated vegetable oil in her Gatorade, only an orange Gatorade. But it was an interesting thing because vegetable oil sounds good to a vegan. But what's this brominated stuff doing? And bromine is another endocrine disruptor. One of the things that PFAS are is also endocrine disruptors, which affects the reproductive organs. But this particular chemical, she said, why is it in there? And the company just refused to answer a letter. So she went to an online organization, posted a petition, and got 220,000 signatures in 6 months.
Wow.
And then the owner, I think it was PepsiCo, maybe it's Coca-Cola, one of those big ones owned Gatorade, wrote back and said, well, we've removed it all. And they did, which is a wonderful story of empowerment. It's a dispersant agent to keep the citrus evenly distributed through the product so it didn't, on the shells, change into 2 layers. But that's, there are other ways to do it other than putting an endocrine disruptor in there that you shouldn't be eating. And they realized that before the lawyers did, and they took it back out. But, if you're 16 years old or older, what have you done recently? This is impressive. And that's, some of us are making videos and trying to change the world. Others of us are trying to do research that we then try to interpret to drive market forces away from using these sets of chemicals. Neither of those are particularly illustrious. There are lots more people doing adventuresome things. But I think even just a common consumer, if you're educated about what you buy, and I thought my Teflon pans could never be replaced. Teflon is a PFAS. And I discovered ceramic works just as well. My eggs taste just as good as they ever, or bad as they ever did. But things haven't changed. Yeah. And so was it necessary to be in my Teflon pan? No. So those are, if you can educate yourself, what has it, what doesn't, if we could get labels on everything, that would be really nice. And then you just simply buy the ones you prefer not to. And if somebody doesn't, that's their choice. But more people will be concerned about this as they get older and as they understand more about this sort of thing. And so I imagine the market forces will drive this nicely and the companies will start manufacturing. It doesn't cost them anything to make. It's actually cheaper to manufacture without them. So they'll have to do some research to figure out what's the best. But that won't bankrupt anybody, and it'll be a better world afterwards.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peaslee. I really appreciate your time. I really do.
No, you're welcome, Ben. I appreciate you reaching out, and I hope that you'll hope this will get out there, and hope people will recognize what's going on.
I hope so too.
It's interesting. Yes. There's lots of questions, and we try to answer them as they show up.
Yes, thank you so much. You have my contact if you need anything from me, and then I'll work on sending everything over to you as soon as it's all done and edited as well.
Very good. Make me sound good. I can remove a few of those extra words I had in there, but that's great.
No, you did amazing, and I'm greatly appreciative, so thank you.
No, thank you for putting this online.
Of course.
Take care.
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.